After losing her husband, an elderly mother is cruelly cast aside by her own son and daughter-in-law and believes she has lost everything, until she discovers that her husband had quietly protected her all along, with love, foresight, and trust. This is a journey from heartbreak to freedom, from being discarded to reclaiming control of her life. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. The Empty Chair. Willow Creek, Oregon winter, 2017. The mahogany dining table had never felt so vast. 3 place settings remained, but only 2 were occupied. Evelyn Parker sat at one end, her hands trembling slightly as she passed the mashed potatoes to her daughter-in-law, Vanessa. Across from her, her son Brian sat silently, eyes fixed on his plate like a man already halfway out the door. The third chair, the one at the head of the table, was empty. It had only been a week since Evelyn buried Henry, her husband of 32 years. 7 slow, dreamless days since she'd stood at the cold edge of his grave while the wind whipped through Willow Creek Cemetery, carrying away the last warm breath of her old life. She hadn't touched his chair since. That evening, something about the silence felt heavier, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Even the ticking of the old grandfather clock seemed more pronounced, as if counting down to something unseen. Vanessa's voice broke the stillness like a shard of glass. "Now that your husband is gone, Evelyn," she said, her fork clinking gently against her plate, "I think it's time you start thinking about what's next." Evelyn blinked. Her mind was slow to catch up. "What do you mean?" Vanessa dabbed at her lips with a cloth napkin, her expression controlled and devoid of grief. "I mean, the house is too much for you now. Big old place like this. Expensive. Hard to manage. It's not practical for someone your age to keep it up." Ryan cleared his throat but said nothing. He had that same familiar, uneasy look she'd seen on him as a boy when he'd broken a window and waited for someone else to confess. Evelyn set her fork down. "I've lived here most of my life," she said softly. "Henry and I bought this house when Brian was still a toddler. We planted the maple tree in the front yard together. We rebuilt the porch after that bad winter in 2098. This is my home." Vanessa smiled, a cold, courteous expression that had no warmth in it. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with forced sympathy, "memories don't pay the heating bill. Brian and I think it's best if you look into one of those senior communities. You'd be around people your age. They have activities and shuttle buses, you know. It would be good for you." Evelyn turned to Brian, pleading for some hint of disagreement, some flicker of the boy she'd once raised, the one who used to leave her daffodils in a juice glass on Mother's Day. But Brian only nodded. "Vanessa's right, Mom. It's too much house. And," he hesitated, "we've been thinking of starting a family. This place would be perfect for kids." The implication landed like a blow. Not only did they want her out, they wanted her house. The home she and Henry had built, painted, loved, suffered in. The home where she held her baby boy for the first time. The home where she nursed Henry through pneumonia. The home where she'd said goodbye to him just a week ago. "This was your father's house," Brian added, almost like an afterthought. "He left it to the family. And now it's time to be practical." Evelyn felt her breath catch, like she'd stepped off a curb she didn't know was there. "I see," she whispered, though she didn't. "Not really." Vanessa stood, her tone suddenly brisk. "We can help you start packing this week. 2 weeks should be plenty of time to find something else." 2 weeks. 32 years of marriage, reduced to a 2-week notice. Evelyn stood slowly, pressing a palm to the edge of the table for balance. Her heart thudded not with fear, but with something older, something more familiar. She didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't ask why. Instead, she climbed the stairs to the bedroom she had shared with Henry, where the air still smelled faintly of his cologne, and his reading glasses remained on the nightstand untouched. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her had silver hair pulled into a bun that had come slightly undone. Her blue eyes, once sharp, looked dulled, like river stones smoothed by decades of flowing water. But beneath the shock, beneath the grief, Evelyn felt something shift. A a quiet click of something falling into place. Henry had always handled the finances. She'd trusted him, leaned on him. But Henry had also been a planner, a thinker, a man who once kept copies of every single tax return since 1985, organized in color-coded binders. She remembered the way he'd smiled sadly, almost apologetically when he asked her to sign a few standard papers about 5 years ago. She hadn't thought much of it then. But now, tomorrow, she would go to the bank. She needed to know what Henry had left behind and to whom. Because if Brian and Vanessa thought they could erase her from the picture without consequence, they might be in for a surprise. The next morning, Evelyn dressed with deliberate care. Not out of vanity, those days were long past, but out of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Intention. She chose a wool coat Henry had given her 2 Christmases ago, lined in soft flannel. The navy matched her eyes. As she buttoned it, her fingers lingered on the small tear near the pocket, a place where Henry's thumb had caught once while helping her out of it. She left the house alone, without telling Brian or Vanessa. Let them think she was running errands or taking a walk to clear her mind. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like a guest in her own life. Willow Creek streets were quiet, softened by a blanket of early snow. The bank sat on the corner of Main and Rosewood, a squat red brick building that had barely changed in 30 years. The same bell chimed as she stepped inside, and behind the desk sat a woman Evelyn hadn't seen in some time. "Evelyn Parker," said Marjorie Taylor, blinking in surprise. "Goodness, I'm so sorry about Henry. He was one of the good ones." Evelyn managed a thin smile. "Thank you, Marjorie. He thought highly of you, too." Marjorie motioned her to a small, glass-walled office off the main lobby. It smelled faintly of printer toner and peppermint. "What can I help you with today?" "I need to understand." "Well, everything," Evelyn said. "Henry handled our finances. I know almost nothing about what we had, or have." Marjorie nodded slowly. "Of course. Let's pull up your profile." She turned to her computer, her fingers tapping briskly. Evelyn sat still, purse folded in her lap, every nerve quietly buzzing. After a minute, Marjorie's brows rose. "Well," she murmured, "there's more here than I expected." "More?" Marjorie clicked through several screens. "Let's start with the basics. There's the joint checking account. You knew about that one?" Evelyn nodded. "That was the one they used for groceries, bills, and holiday gifts. There's also a savings account in both your names. And here's where it gets interesting. There are several accounts listed under your name alone. 2 CDs, a money market account, and a trust." Evelyn blinked. "A trust?" "Yes, opened 5 years ago. It's labeled Henderson Construction Trust. Does that sound familiar?" The words hit her like wind through an open door. Henderson Construction was Henry's business, but he sold it when he retired. That's what he told me. Marjorie gave her a measured look. According to these records, the business was restructured, not sold. Ownership was transferred to the trust, and you, Mrs. Parker, are the sole beneficiary. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Marjorie stood and went to the printer. She returned with several pages and slid them across the desk. "This is the balance in your trust account, and these," she handed Evelyn the rest of the papers, "are the transactions going into it." The numbers didn't make sense at first. Evelyn hadn't seen more than a few $1,000s in any account before. But here, lines of deposits flowed steadily, monthly transfers, consistent and growing. And the totals? Enough to buy a house, enough to live on, enough to never need help from Brian or Vanessa or anyone again. "My name is on all of these?" Evelyn asked softly. Marjorie nodded. "You signed the paperwork. My guess is Henry had you sign during routine updates, address changes. Account transition, she likely didn't want to burden you with details." Evelyn looked down at her own looping signature, inked clearly on the bottom of each page. She remembered those visits. He'd called them bank errands, usually sandwiched between a stop at the hardware store and lunch at the diner. She had never questioned what she was signing. Henry hadn't lied. He'd just planned, quietly, carefully. "Mrs. Parker," Marjorie said gently, "Henry built this to protect you. This was intentional." A hush settled over the room. Outside the window, snow flurried against the glass. But inside, Evelyn felt a new kind of stillness. Not the cold emptiness of grief, but something steadier, firmer. Resolve. They think I have nothing, Evelyn whispered. Marjorie tilted her head. My son. His wife. They think I'm just some old woman clinging to a house she can't afford. They're already planning the renovations. They think they've won. Marjorie's eyes gleamed with something fierce and warm. Then they're in for a surprise. Evelyn rose, her knees creaking. Her spine, however, felt straighter than it had in weeks. I'd like a printed copy of everything, she said. Every account, every document. Of course. And Evelyn. She looked back. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. The manila folder sat on the passenger's seat like it contained secrets that could change a life. Because it did. Evelyn had stopped at a cafe on her way home from the bank. She didn't go inside. Instead, she sat in the parking lot, engine idling for warmth, and spread the documents across her lap. Pages of transactions, trust fund statements, and account authorizations all pointing to one startling truth. Henry hadn't just left her money, he'd left her power, and she had no idea what to do with it. For 32 years, she had trusted Henry with the logistics of their life together. She paid bills and clipped coupons, sure, but the big picture stuff? That had been Henry's domain, and now that domain was hers. When she finally turned off the car and walked into the house, the smell of chili greeted her, a scent that used to mean comfort. Now, it just reminded her of the woman standing in the kitchen. Evelyn Vanessa called sweetly. You were out early this morning. I hope you didn't overdo it. Evelyn didn't respond. She headed straight upstairs, ignoring the pang in her knees. Let them wonder. Let them stew. She needed answers, not excuses. That afternoon, she called the number printed on the trust document. Morrison and Associates, Accounting and Business Services. A woman named Margaret Morrison answered in a voice lined with calm professionalism and just a hint of curiosity. Yes, I knew your husband well, she said. I handled the books for Henderson Construction for over 15 years. He was a meticulous client. I'd like to come in, Evelyn said. As soon as possible. Margaret didn't hesitate. Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. Morrison and Associates operated out of a modest office building tucked between a hardware store and a florist shop. Evelyn hadn't been there before, but something about it felt oddly familiar, like the place had been orbiting her life without her realizing it. Margaret met her at the door. She was a tall woman, perhaps in her early 70s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. Her gray hair was swept into a neat chignon, and her handshake was warm but firm. Come in, Mrs. Parker, she said. Or may I call you Evelyn? Please do, Evelyn said. They settled into a room lined with filing cabinets and muted paintings of Oregon's coast. A cup of black tea steamed gently at Margaret's side. I understand you've recently learned about the Henderson Construction Trust. Evelyn nodded. Henry never told me. Any of it. Margaret gave a small, understanding smile. Your husband was deliberate, Evelyn. Not secretive. He often said, planning well means Evelyn will never have to scramble. That one sentence made Evelyn's throat tighten. Margaret turned to her computer. Let me show you something. She opened a series of digital files and spun the monitor toward Evelyn. For the past 5 years, the company has operated under the trust. Henry maintained oversight, but he appointed a day-to-day manager, Jack Monroe. Do you know him? Of course. Jack was with Henry from the beginning. Well, Jack's been quietly keeping the business running under the same principles. Your husband valued small jobs, reliable clients, steady contracts. The profit margins aren't enormous, but they're consistent. More importantly, the books are clean. She handed Evelyn a printed summary. Revenue reports, tax filings, quarterly profits. I thought the business had been sold, Evelyn whispered. Margaret shook her head. Number. It was restructured, repackaged in a way that protected it from external claims. Henry wanted to ensure that no matter what happened, the income stream from the company would support you for the rest of your life. Evelyn blinked at the rows of numbers. So, I'm the owner? You are the beneficiary of the trust, which effectively makes you the sole stakeholder in Henderson Construction. Evelyn sat back. She owned a company. At 71. Margaret hesitated. There's more. She pulled out a folder thick, neatly organized, and marked with color-coded tabs. These are loan agreements between Henderson Construction and Brian Parker. Evelyn froze. Loans? Documented and signed by both your husband and your son, Margaret said. Over the past 5 years, Brian has borrowed a total of $87,000 from the company. The terms were clear monthly payments, modest interest, no forgiveness clauses. Has he been paying? Margaret's mouth pressed into a thin line. Number? Not consistently. According to the schedule, he's nearly 4 years in arrears. With interest and penalties, the total outstanding is closer to $96,000. Evelyn stared at the folder, her breath shallow. The betrayal stung sharper than before. While Brian and Vanessa were measuring her kitchen for new cabinets, while they were urging her to pack her memories into cardboard boxes, they were already deep in debt to her, and didn't even know it. They told me Henry left nothing but bills, Evelyn said. Not true, Margaret said gently. He left you security, options, control. Evelyn looked up. And what do I do now? Margaret reached across the desk and placed a hand over hers. Now, you decide who you want to be. The morning air was crisp, the frost still clinging to the edges of the lawn like a warning. Evelyn stood at the window with a mug of black tea, watching as Jack Monroe's old Ford pickup rolled into the driveway. The sound of his heavy boots on the front steps brought with it a strange kind of comfort-like hearing the firm knock of someone who knew they belonged. She opened the door before he could lift his hand. Morning, Jack, she said. He tipped his hat politely, face weathered but kind. Mrs. Parker, thank you for seeing me. Call me Evelyn. She led him into the kitchen, the same kitchen Vanessa had recently referred to as dark and dated, but fixable. Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee, noting how Jack's eyes scanned the room, not in judgment but with recognition. He'd eaten countless lunches here during Henry's working year. She knew every creak in the floor and smudge on the wall. I won't waste your time, he said, setting his cup down. I've been worried since Henry passed. Brian came by the office 2 days ago. Told me I'd be reporting to him now. Said the business needed streamlining. Evelyn's stomach turned. What did you tell him? Jack shrugged. That I'd wait for instructions from whoever was legally in charge. Your husband always said not to make assumptions about authority. She smiled faintly. Henry prepared you well. I suppose he did. Evelyn reached into the folder beside her and slid a packet of documents across the table. This is everything from the trust. Henderson Construction is held entirely under my name. I am the sole beneficiary. Jack stared at the papers, then looked up slowly. His expression was unreadable at first shock, then relief, and finally something stronger. Loyalty. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered, then quickly added. Pardon the language, ma'am. She chuckled. You're allowed. He leaned back, exhaling hard. Henry really thought of everything, didn't he? Evelyn nodded. Even when I didn't know it. Jack's face turned more serious. Brian's been sniffing around the books for years, always asking questions about upcoming payments or trying to time his visits with contract closings. I didn't say anything before because, well, it wasn't my place. It is now, Evelyn said quietly. Jack gave a slow nod. What do you want to do? I want things to continue exactly as they have. Same staff, same projects, same way of doing business. Henry believed in steady growth and loyalty. So do I. Jack grinned. You got it, boss. Just then, the crunch of tires on gravel snapped their heads toward the window. A silver Honda SUV was pulling into the driveway Brian's car. Evelyn's heart tightened, but not with fear. This was different. This was anticipation. The car door slammed. Moments later, Brian stepped into the kitchen without knocking, looking surprised to see Jack seated at the table. Jack? He said, blinking. Didn't expect you here. Jack raised an eyebrow. We had some business to discuss. Brian's eyes moved to his mother. You didn't mention that. You didn't ask, Evelyn said. Brian ignored the comment and turned back to Jack. Listen, about the company, I need you to pull the last 3 months' financials and equipment inventory. Vanessa and I are meeting with a potential investor next week. Jack didn't move. And who authorized that meeting? Brian bristled. I did. I'm Henry's son. His only child. The business is family-owned. Jack looked at Evelyn. Evelyn sipped her tea. Actually, Brian, she said gently, you're mistaken. He froze. What? I own the business. Not the estate. Not you. Me. Brian laughed at a short, incredulous burst. Come on, Mom. You don't even know how to log into a business account. True, she said calmly. But I know how to sign a trust. And your father knew how to protect what mattered. Brian blinked. Wait, are you serious? You're telling me this whole company belongs to you? Yes. Why would Dad... To protect me, she said. From this exact moment, the color drained from his face. Evelyn stood slowly, placing the papers back into the folder. You've taken loans from this company, Brian, she said. Thousands of dollars. With signatures, with interest, all documented. You didn't think we kept records? Brian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I've seen the totals, she continued. You're nearly $100,000 in debt, and this time, you can't smile your way out of it. His jaw clenched. You can't be serious. I'm absolutely serious. Jack stood. I think I'll let you two talk. No, Evelyn said firmly. You stay. This is your company too, in a way. You've kept it running with integrity. You deserve to hear this. She turned back to Brian, whose hands were clenched into fists. You tried to edge me out of my own home. You and Vanessa thought you could erase me, but the foundation you were building your future on, that was mine. Henry made sure of it. He stepped forward. Mom, please, Vanessa, and I didn't mean... Evelyn held up a hand. This isn't a discussion. This is a boundary. From now on, if you want to talk about business, talk to my lawyer. If you want to talk about family, well, that's going to take more than words. Brian stood there, stunned. Outside, a bird chirped, as if mocking the silence. Then, wordlessly, Brian turned and walked out. When the sound of his car faded down the road, Jack looked at her. Mrs. Parker, he said, I've known you a long time, but I don't think I've ever seen you stand so tall. She smiled not proudly, but with something deeper. Certainty. The knock came at 7 a.m., not the hesitant tap of a visitor, not the polite, rhythmic knock of a neighbor. No, this was the pounding insistence of someone who believed they had the right to enter, no matter what the hour. Evelyn opened the door without haste, her face composed and unreadable. Outside, Brian and Vanessa stood like prosecutors arriving to present their case. Vanessa was dressed as if for court-sharp blazer, heels too tall for practicality, and a designer handbag slung like armor over her shoulder. Brian looked worse. His eyes were puffy, his jaw tense. There was no polite smile this time. We need to talk, he said. Evelyn stepped aside. Then come in. But let's be clear, this is my home, and I'll be the one talking if I choose to. Vanessa gave a little scoff, but entered without a word, her heels clicking across the hardwood like tiny hammers. Brian followed, already on edge. They stood in the living room like strangers in a waiting room. Evelyn took her usual seat, Henry's old armchair, letting the sun from the east-facing window pool behind her. It gave her a kind of quiet authority, one she didn't try to amplify. She didn't have to. Vanessa got to the point. Tom Bradley says he's not answering to Brian anymore, she said. Says everything has to go through you. What's going on, Evelyn? Evelyn folded her hands. Exactly what I told you at dinner, this is my home. And now you know, the business is mine too. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. But that's impossible. Henry would never. He did, Evelyn interrupted calmly. 5 years ago, he moved the company into a trust. I'm the beneficiary. He ensured you wouldn't get your hands on it. Vanessa looked like she'd been slapped. Brian tried to regain control. Mom, look, we just want to make things work. You know, Dad always said the house should stay in the family. And it is, Evelyn replied. I'm family. You two, however, have treated me like a squatter in my own life. And now that you've realized I'm not so easy to erase, you come here. Why exactly? Vanessa took a breath, rallying. We think it's time to come to a compromise, she said. Compromise? Evelyn repeated, as if testing the word in her mouth. Yes. You keep the trust income. maybe even the house for now. But Brian should have a say in the business. It's his inheritance. Inheritance? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Your inheritance is still very much alive and drinking her morning tea. Don't be cute, Vanessa snapped. You know what we mean. No, Evelyn said sharply. You know what you mean. You mean entitlement. You mean you want something you didn't earn and think you're owed? Brian interjected, voice softer. Mom, Dad always wanted to help us. He gave me loans. And you never paid them, Evelyn cut in. Never once kept to a schedule, never even thanked him properly. You treated him like a safety net, and me like a burden. That's not fair, he muttered. No? She opened the folder on the coffee table, the one she'd placed there before they arrived. Here are the loan documents. Amounts, dates, missed payments. As of last month, you owe the business $96,000. Vanessa's face drained of color. That can't be right. You thought Henry was too kind to collect. And you were right. He was. But now he's gone. And I will collect. Brian stepped forward, his voice rising. You're destroying this family over money? Evelyn looked at him, long and hard. No, Brian, you destroyed this family the night you smiled while your wife told me to pack my bags. You chose your comfort over your conscience. Don't blame me for standing up when you expected me to disappear. Vanessa's composure cracked. You don't know what you're doing. You don't have a business degree. You've never managed anything like this. I raised a son and ran a household for 30 years, Evelyn said, her voice low but ironclad. I stretched a teacher's salary and a construction income through 2 recessions. I survived grief and silence and being pushed aside in my own home. If I can survive all that, I can certainly manage a business. Silence. You'll regret this, Vanessa hissed, grabbing her purse. Brian lingered, eyes flicking from the folder to his mother. Mom, please. Don't do this. We can work something out. I'm not doing anything to you, she said. I'm simply refusing to let you do it to me. As they turned to leave, Evelyn stood. Oh, and one more thing, she called after them. You'll be hearing from my lawyer about the debt. Vanessa didn't look back, but Brian did, and what Evelyn saw in his face wasn't anger or hatred. It was fear, real fear for the first time. He understood that she held all the cards. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The kettle whistled gently as Evelyn poured hot water into her favorite porcelain mug, the one with faded blue hydrangeas Henry had given her on their 20th anniversary. She wrapped her fingers around the warm ceramic and walked to the front window, where the late morning sun had begun to melt the frost on the porch rail. It had been 3 days since the confrontation. No word from Brian. No texts, no calls, not even a fake cheerful voicemail pretending none of it happened, which was just as well. Evelyn had things to do. By 10 a.m., she was seated in the cozy, book-lined office of Daniel Crowley, a local attorney known for being both compassionate and ruthlessly precise. Henry had mentioned him a few times over the years, usually after reading one of his columns in the Willow Creek Weekly. I've read over the trust documents, Daniel said, tapping a thick folder with one neatly manicured finger. Your husband was very thorough. He left no gaps. Evelyn nodded. That sounds like Henry. I've also reviewed the loan agreements between your son and Henderson Construction. They're airtight. Brian signed each one terms, interest, repayment schedule. His outstanding balance, including compounded interest, currently stands at $96,412. The number still made Evelyn feel like she was reading someone else's story. Daniel continued. You have every legal right to collect. If he defaults, we can pursue garnishment, liens, or even small claims judgments. Will it destroy him? Evelyn asked quietly. Daniel looked up. Legally? Number? It will hurt, certainly, but it won't ruin him. Financially, he'll recover. Emotionally? That depends on how much pride he's built on assumptions. Evelyn nodded. I don't want to punish him. I just want boundaries. For once. Daniel sat back, studying her. Can I ask something more personal? Of course. Why now? What changed? Evelyn sipped her tea. The warmth steadied her. My husband spent 30 years trying to shield me from the world's cruelty, she said. He handled the bank, the bills, the business so I didn't have to. And for a long time, I thought that was love. But now, I see the real gift wasn't protection, it was preparation. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Evelyn leaned forward. Henry didn't leave me defenseless. He left me equipped. I just didn't realize I was allowed to use what he gave me. You're using it now, Daniel said. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I am. That afternoon, Evelyn returned home to find Jack Monroe waiting on the porch, holding a paper bag and a sheepish smile. I brought pie, he said. Ruth made too many again. You're just trying to earn points with the new boss, she teased. Is it working? Come inside. They sat at the kitchen table, now free of clutter since Evelyn had cleared away the boxes Brian and Vanessa had started using for pre-staging. She cut 2 slices of the apple pie and set them on ceramic plates that hadn't seen daylight in years. Jack took a bite and sighed. Still warm. That woman could win state fairs. Evelyn smiled but said nothing, her thoughts still wrapped around loan documents and trust assets. Jack set down his fork. You okay? She looked at him, really looked, and realized she hadn't been asked that question in a sincere tone in quite some time. I'm steady, she said. Not okay yet, but steady. Good, he said, then added. You've got more strength than most people I know. She shrugged. Took me 71 years to realize it. Jack's eyes softened. Better late than never. Later that evening, Evelyn sat at Henry's old desk in the study now, her study. The wood smelled faintly of cedar and memory. She opened the drawer where he used to keep his ledgers and found his handwriting still present in the margins of old notebooks. Neat, blocky script with notes like, call Jack about porch job and don't forget Evelyn's tea blend store near bakery. She ran a finger over the ink, tears rising unexpectedly not out of sorrow, but something closer to gratitude. He had always known. Even when she hadn't, Evelyn opened a blank notebook and began writing her own notes. To do? Meet with Margaret. Accounting. About business restructuring options. Finalize payment demand letter with Daniel. Open new personal checking account under trust. Cancel real estate appointment. Vanessa scheduled. Order new mailbox key. Brian still has a copy? Find time to breathe. She paused at that last line, pen hovering, then underlined it. Twice. At dusk, she took her tea out to the porch. The lights inside glowed gently behind her, and for the first time in weeks, she wasn't dreading nightfall. A car passed slowly down the street, then another. Quiet returned. And in that quiet, Evelyn understood something simple but profound. She didn't need to fight to belong anymore. She already did. Not because someone allowed her to, but because she had claimed her place. The wind coming off Willow Creek Lake had a particular smell this time of year, damp earth, pine needles, and something faintly metallic that Evelyn could never quite name. It was the scent of late winter sliding toward spring, the kind of transition she used to mark with a new pair of gloves or the changing of porch flowers. Today, she marked it with a haircut. Nothing dramatic, just a few inches trimmed, the silver strands now framing her face more neatly. Her stylist, a woman half her age with a kind heart and a mother in a similar situation, had offered it with a knowing smile. Sometimes a small change on the outside helps you remember what's shifting on the inside. It was true. Evelyn walked out of the salon and into the early afternoon light feeling not younger but clearer. She was about to head home when she decided on impulsetto stop by the Willow Creek Cafe. She hadn't been there since before Henry died. It was their Sunday place. 2 coffees, 1 slice of berry pie, and always the corner booth. She didn't intend to stay long, but as she stepped inside, a voice behind her stopped her cold. Evelyn Parker? She turned. Standing there, holding a to-go cup and looking both exactly the same and somehow entirely different, was Joseph Green. Her heart stumbled. He was older now, of course, his dark hair, mostly gray, lines etched around his eyes. But those eyes were unmistakable. The same steady gaze he had offered her in high school when she was dating Henry, and he was just the quiet friend who always walked beside her between classes. Joseph, she said. unsure if she was smiling or holding her breath. Good heavens. I haven't seen you since, well, since forever. He laughed. 28 years at least. I moved back last year after retiring. Bought my aunt's old place on Maple Lane. Evelyn blinked. I thought you were in Seattle. A doctor, wasn't it? Still am, technically. But now I mostly grow tomatoes and lecture my niece about sunscreen. She laughed softly. It felt strange. Good strange. Joseph tilted his head. Sit with me? Just for a few minutes? Unless you've got somewhere urgent to be. She hesitated, then nodded. They took a booth near the window, her old booth with Henry. And for the first time, it didn't sting. It felt okay. Better than okay. How are you holding up? He asked. No preamble, no performance. Just genuine interest. She appreciated that. I'm still finding out, she said. Every day is different. He nodded slowly. Loss rewrites you, doesn't it? Not just emotionally, but practically. The little things change. Your rhythm, your conversations, even how you close a door. Evelyn looked at him with something like awe. I haven't heard anyone say it quite like that, she said. He shrugged. When I lost my sister 3 years ago, I kept setting out 2 mugs in the morning. It took months to stop. Their eyes met, and in the space between them, quiet understanding bloomed. Not romance. Not yet, but recognition. He didn't press her for more. Didn't ask about Brian or Vanessa or the business or the scandal that had probably reached every corner of Willow Creek by now. He simply shared stories about adjusting to retirement, learning how to bake bread, and volunteering at the local senior center. I run a little support group now, he said, for folks who've been displaced, widows, people dealing with sudden changes in income or housing. I think we all feel a little unmoored these days. Evelyn tilted her head. You call it a support group, but it sounds more like anchoring, Joseph chuckled. Maybe that's what I should call it. Anchored. They sat for another half hour, not watching the clock, not filling every silence, just letting presence do its work. When she finally stood to leave, Joseph followed her outside. I'd like to see you again, he said. Just talk. No pressure. Evelyn nodded. That might be nice. He smiled. You look strong, Evelyn, and I mean that in the best possible way. She touched her scarf, uncertain of what to say. Thank you. I'm trying. He gave a little salute with his coffee cup. Keep going. And then he walked away. That evening, Evelyn returned to the house with something unfamiliar swelling in her chest. Not hope, exactly. Not yet, but light. A single lamp in a long hallway. Not enough to banish every shadow, but enough to move forward without fear. She pulled the trust ledger from the desk drawer, reviewed her checklist, made notes for Margaret and Daniel, and scheduled the next week's business call with Jack. And then, just before bedtime, she did something she hadn't done in a long, long time. She played music, from Henry's old stereo. Dusty, yes, but still functional. A little Ella Fitzgerald, a little Nat King Cole. And for a moment, the house didn't feel like a fortress she'd had to defend. It felt like home again. Not the home she'd once shared, but the one she was now learning to own. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. The envelope was cream-colored and thick legal stock, with Evelyn's name printed neatly in the upper left corner. She placed it on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a moment. Not because she was unsure of what it contained, but because she knew exactly what it meant. Daniel Crowley had called the day before. The demand letter is ready, he'd said. If you'd like, we can mail it certified. Or you can deliver it yourself. Evelyn had chosen the latter. She wasn't out for vengeance. But she wasn't going to hide either. This was no longer about money. It was about standing upright after years of bending. She tucked the envelope into her leather handbag, the same one she'd carried to Henry's retirement dinner, and stepped out into the soft gray of a February morning. She didn't bother calling ahead. Brian and Vanessa lived on Alder Street, in a sleek 2-story they'd bought 5 years ago when the business loans began to roll in. Evelyn remembered the day Henry had written the first check. He'd said Brian needed help getting started. Apparently, getting started meant granite countertops and a $2,000 espresso machine. She parked down the street and walked the final block. When Brian opened the door, his surprise was immediate and unmasked. "Mom?" Evelyn smiled, polite but firm. "Good morning, Brian. I won't stay long." Vanessa appeared behind him, wearing a silk robe and a face mask, clearly mid-morning routine. "I brought something for you," Evelyn continued, retrieving the envelope and handing it over. "It's from my attorney." Brian stared at it like it might explode. Vanessa stepped forward. "What is this?" "A demand letter," Evelyn said simply, "outlining the repayment schedule for the loans you took from Henderson Construction." Vanessa's tone turned brittle. "You're suing your own son?" "Number. I'm collecting on a legal obligation. The word loan is not symbolic." Brian looked stricken. "Mom, please." "You can't do this." "I can," she said. "And I am." "But Brian, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it to remind you that choices have consequences. Your father may have forgiven your debts in silence. I won't. That silence nearly erased me." He looked down at the envelope, then away. Vanessa scoffed. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. Once the town hears about what you've done." Evelyn met her gaze. "Let them hear. Let every widow in Willow Creek know that it's never too late to take your name back." Without another word, she turned and walked away. She didn't look back. That afternoon, Evelyn stopped by the town library. Not for books, but for something she hadn't expected. A thank you card. It was taped to the front desk with her name on it, penned in a child's handwriting. "Mrs. Parker, thank you for helping my mom when I was sick. I remember your soup and your funny stories. You always smiled even when you looked tired. I'm doing better now. I hope you are too." It was signed, Lucas Ortega. Age 10. Evelyn's chest tightened. Lucas had been their next-door neighbor for years. A sweet boy with oversized glasses and a quiet disposition. His mother, Rosa, had worked nights at the care center, and Evelyn used to babysit when Rosa couldn't find anyone else. Lucas had been sick one winter of pneumonia. Evelyn made him soup, read him stories, and once stayed with him overnight when Rosa was called into an emergency shift. He had been so small, his breath so shallow. Now, years later, he remembered. She asked the librarian where the family had gone. "Moved to Redmond last year," the woman said. "But Rosa sends letters to the kids here sometimes. Said you were one of the only neighbors who helped." Evelyn stepped outside into the brittle winter sun, clutching the card. That single piece of paper was worth more than any settlement, any company, any real estate, because it said something Brian and Vanessa never had. You mattered. That night, Evelyn called Jack Monroe and confirmed the spring contract for the Morrison Office Park project. She also arranged a bonus for the crew, small, but symbolic. A reward for steady hands during uncertain times. Later, while brushing her hair, she looked at her reflection and didn't feel like someone holding on anymore. She felt like someone who had arrived. Not at the beginning of a story, but finally, at the center of her own. Evelyn had always imagined that running a business would feel overwhelming, like juggling too many plates while someone shouted numbers in her ear. But under Jack Monroe's quiet guidance and Margaret Whitmore's steady reports, the reality felt surprisingly manageable. In fact, it felt like something she was born to do. She didn't need to lift drywall or negotiate steel prices. Jack took care of all that. What she brought to the table was something different. Clarity, steadiness, and the kind of instinct that came from managing a family, a household, and for the last few years, her own survival. And numbers? Well, they made more sense when you had a reason to protect them. Every Monday, Evelyn joined a virtual meeting with Jack and Margaret. She'd sit at Henry's old desk, notepad open, glasses low on her nose. She reviewed contracts, approved payroll, discussed risk management with a kind of calm Henry would have admired. And each week, she felt her spine straighten just a bit more. Midway through March, Evelyn called Daniel Crowley with an idea. "I'd like to restructure the company's profit-sharing model," she said. "Jack's been carrying more than his weight for years. I want him to have a percentage." Daniel approved. "That's an excellent move. It also strengthens your employee retention profile, legally and ethically sound." Evelyn smiled. "I'm not doing it for optics. I'm doing it because it's fair." The next day, She invited Jack over and handed him the new terms in a sealed envelope. He opened it, scanned the page, then blinked. "Ma'am, this is more generous than I expected." "It's not charity," she said. "It's recognition." He didn't speak for a long moment, then finally murmured, "Henry would be proud of you." "I hope so," Evelyn replied. Later that week, she stood in the doorway of her bedroom, a moving box at her feet. Not packed out of necessity, but out of intention. She was leaving this house. Not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. The past few weeks had shifted something inside her. What once felt like a battle to keep what was hers now felt like a gentle permission to begin again. The house was beautiful, filled with memories, but it no longer held her future. She had one more piece of paper to sign before it was official: the deed transfer for the Mendocino cottage, a property Henry had quietly purchased 3 years before through the Henderson Trust. Margaret had found the documentation 2 weeks ago, along with a handwritten note tucked between bank forms, for Evelyn when she's ready for ocean air and no schedule but her own. He had never shown it to her, but he had made it real. One Saturday afternoon, she met Joseph Green again. They sat at a sunny corner table in the cafe, a shared pot of tea between them. "You seem lighter," he said, after their second cup. "I'm choosing peace," she said. "It's not always easy, but it's starting to feel natural." He nodded, watching her over the rim of his mug. "Still thinking of leaving Willow Creek?" She smiled. "Yes, and no. I'll keep the business here, of course, but my home, I think it's somewhere with sea air and a front porch facing west." Joseph was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you need someone to help you carry boxes?" Evelyn laughed, truly laughed. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. That evening, she started packing in earnest. Not just the furniture and dishes, but the little things. The letters Henry wrote her on yellow legal pads, the cookbook with his scribbled edits, the pressed flowers from their anniversary trip to Crater Lake. She wasn't taking everything, just what mattered. The rest she donated. As she worked, she found a small framed picture tucked in the back of a drawer. It was her and Henry at their first house, sitting on a crate, holding takeout boxes and laughing like children. She placed it gently into the keep box. Some beginnings were worth holding on to. The sound of waves was different here. In Willow Creek, everything had been surrounded by trees and wind whispers of pine, the rustle of leaves brushing against weathered siding. But in Mendocino, the ocean spoke in rhythm. Soft, steady, unavoidable. Evelyn stood on the small deck of her new cottage, mug in hand, breath rising in the crisp morning air. Below the cliff, sea foam lapped against the rocks. The sky was a patchwork of silver and pale blue, sunlight filtering through like old linen. It was her third morning here. The movers had come and gone. Jack had helped with the heavier boxes. Joseph had driven down the second day with a set of tools she hadn't asked for but now deeply appreciated. The cottage was smaller than the house in Willow Creek: 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a living room with uneven floors and the scent of salt embedded in the walls. But it was hers. Every choice inside was her own. She picked the curtains. She chose the dishes. She arranged the books in the built-in shelves by color, not subject, just because it made her smile. There were no negotiations, no compromises, no voices telling her to be practical. Henry had bought the place 3 years ago and had quietly overseen renovations, from afferrating handrails in the bathroom, reinforcing the deck, installing a gas fireplace. Margaret had shown her the receipts. He'd even left a note, tucked into a drawer with the title deed. "For when you're ready, you always loved the sea." She cried when she read it, not because it made her sad, but because it proved once again that love could leave footprints long after the person had gone. On her 5th day, she hosted Jack and Margaret for lunch. They sat around a wobbly picnic table she found at a thrift store, eating crab salad and sourdough bread from a bakery down the hill. "You did good," Jack said, taking in the view. Margaret nodded. "This place feels like peace." Evelyn smiled. "That's exactly what it is." Margaret handed her an envelope. "These are the quarterly reports for Henderson Construction. Payroll is smooth. Jack's new bonus structure is in place. And the trust account is healthy, very healthy." Evelyn placed the envelope inside the little woven basket she kept by the door. I trust you both, she said. Just keep doing what you're doing. I'll review everything on Sundays. Jack raised his glass of lemonade. To new chapters. Evelyn lifted hers. To intentional ones. They clinked gently. That evening, Joseph stopped by with a basket of oranges from his sister's garden and a book on whale migration. It's the season, he said, placing the book on her kitchen counter. They'll be passing by this stretch of coast in about 3 weeks. Sometimes they get close enough to see from the bluff. Evelyn looked at the map inside the front cover. How long do they travel? Thousands of miles, Joseph said. From Alaska to Baja California and back again. All to give birth in warmer waters. Then they swim home. Evelyn traced the dotted path on the map with her finger. Home, she murmured. Joseph watched her. Do you think this is it? For you? She thought about that for a moment, then nodded. Yes. Not because it's where I ended up, but because it's where I chose to begin again. He smiled. Then you're already farther along than most. Before he left, he asked if she'd like to come to a small dinner next week, just a few locals, nothing formal. She agreed, surprising herself. Not out of politeness, but because she wanted to? That night, as the stars began to appear beyond the glass panes of her bedroom window, Evelyn sat cross-legged on the edge of her bed, reading the whale book. A sentence on the last page caught her attention. Whales carry generations of memory in their roots uncharted but deeply known. They return not by sight, but by feeling. She closed the book, leaned back into the pillows, and smiled. That's what she had done. She hadn't followed signs or coordinates. She had followed instinct. Pain, love, Lawsoned, ended up exactly where she needed to be. The ocean continued its rhythm outside. A lullaby, a declaration, a homecoming. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The courthouse was smaller than Evelyn expected. A single-story building with weathered siding, surrounded by tall eucalyptus trees. The courtroom itself held just 4 rows of pew-like benches, a judge's bench, and a long table for each side. No jury, no audience, just the facts. Wade sat across the room with his lawyer, wearing a blazer that didn't quite fit and a face that seemed both defiant and defeated. Romy was absent. According to Margaret, she had decided to stop participating in the process after her name was removed from all future business communications. I'm not going to beg your mother for money, she'd reportedly said. And she hadn't. Now it was just Wade tired, thinner, and wearing the weight of responsibility for the first time in his life. Evelyn's attorney, James Patterson, reviewed the documents one final time and whispered, "Everything's in place. This is just a formality." Evelyn nodded. "Let's get it done." The judge called the session to order. The matter at hand: enforcement of the debt settlement between Evelyn Henderson, sole beneficiary of the Henderson Construction Trust, and Wade Henderson, named debtor for $96, 0-inch outstanding loans. It was quick. The judge confirmed that Wade had signed all relevant agreements voluntarily, that legal counsel had been provided, and that no evidence of coercion or impropriety had been found. The ruling was simple. The agreement would stand. Garnishment was authorized in the event of missed payments. The gavel struck. The session ended. Wade didn't move. Evelyn rose slowly, gathered her purse, and turned to leave. "Mom, wait." His voice stopped her. She turned back. He stood up but didn't approach. "I know you think I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "And maybe I don't. But I wanted you to hear me say it. I'm sorry. For all of it. For believing Romy. For letting you carry the weight. For assuming you'd always be there no matter what." Evelyn studied him for a moment. Her son. Her boy. Still in there, under the years of entitlement and distance. "I don't hate you, Wade," she said gently. "But I also don't owe you my trust. That's something you'll have to earn." He nodded slowly. "I'll keep paying. I'll make it right. Someday." "Then let's see who we both are." "Someday," she replied. Back in Mendocino, the fog rolled in early. The ocean sounded closer than usual, as if leaning in to listen. Evelyn curled up on her deck chair with a blanket and a cup of tea, watching the mist blur the edge of the cliffs. She had spoken her truth. She had stood her ground. But more than that, she had discovered something unexpected: that justice wasn't the end of a story. It was a clearing. A chance to choose the next step with clarity. Her phone buzzed. A message from Margaret. Quarterly profits posted. 7% higher than last cycle. Also, Joseph says the whales have been spotted. Look to the north, around 6 a.m. Evelyn smiled. She set an alarm. The next morning, just before dawn, she stood by the bluff wrapped in Henry's old cardigan. And there they were, 3 whales. Graceful shadows rising and falling through the water, traveling together without haste. No signs, no words, just memory, just instinct, just forward. 6 months passed, then 9, then a year. Time didn't erase anything, but it softened the edges of grief, of memory, even of betrayal. Evelyn no longer counted days. She counted gardens blooming, letters received, quilts completed, whale sightings, coffee dates with neighbors who'd become friends. And of course, every Friday, the call from Tom. "Henderson Construction is still in good shape, ma'am," he always said. "And we've added 2 new apprentices. Your husband would have liked that." Each Friday, she smiled and told him what flowers were blooming outside her window. She'd stopped watching the house in the city, stopped wondering if Wade would ever pay early. She simply lived. One Wednesday morning, while sipping coffee at the bistro in Mendocinoth, one that always saved her the table by the window, young woman approached her cautiously. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Henderson? I saw you speak at the women's group last fall." Evelyn looked up, surprised. "I am. I just wanted to say thank you. My brother tried to take everything after our mother died. I thought I was crazy for fighting back, but hearing your story, it gave me the courage to say no." Evelyn reached out and took the girl's hand. "You weren't crazy. You were protecting what was yours." The young woman nodded. Her eyes welled with quiet gratitude before she whispered, "You saved me." And just like that, Evelyn understood. Noel had saved her. And now, somehow, she was saving others. That night, Evelyn stood again on her deck. The stars were out. The ocean shimmered silver and black under the moonlight. She raised a glass of wine and whispered, "To the ones who protect quietly. To the ones who find their voice late, but firm. To the women who learned they are more than what was done to them." She paused, and then, smiling, she added, "And to the table by the window where I always choose myself first." She clinked her glass against the wooden railing like a silent toast to the past stand, a vow to the future. Life after the final confrontation was strangely quiet. No more unexpected knocks on the door. No more messages urging me to tidy up the house for the next photo shoot. The old house once crowded with tension was now just me and Noel's memory, settling gently into the warm afternoon light spilling across the kitchen window. I didn't feel triumphant, but I wasn't broken either. What mattered was simple. I had protected myself. And at this age, that felt like victory enough. 3 days later, I got a call from James, my attorney. "Mrs. Henderson," he said evenly, "Wade and Romy have hired a lawyer and formally filed a challenge against the trust." I wasn't surprised. People who are used to taking rarely accept that some things were never theirs to begin with. But Noel had prepared everything. Every signature, every transfer, every clause in that trust documented and sealed with care. James had already sent copies to their attorney's office before the challenge even arrived. The other side received the files and fell silent. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from Wade except for one short call on a quiet Friday night. "I don't understand why you're doing this, Mom," he said. His voice was low, cold. I answered simply, "Because once, I didn't choose anything at all and nearly lost everything." Life went on. I began moving a few things into the little seaside cottage in Mendocino, the one Noel had quietly bought and left for me. It was modest, with a balcony facing the ocean and a kitchen full of sunlight. The house didn't feel lonely. It felt loved, not by someone still here, but by someone who had left and never once forgotten me. I moved in on my 72nd birthday. Alone. At peace. That day, I opened an old box labeled in his handwriting, "For Myrtle, when you're ready." Inside was a bundle of letters Noel had written over the years, each one marking a moment of love. In one of the last letters, he wrote, "I don't know when you'll need this, but if you're reading it, that means you're still standing." And that's all I ever hoped for. I sat still for a long time, then smiled, because I was still standing. And now, I was walking forward on a path drawn by no one but me. The sea had become her rhythm. Every morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of waves brushing the rocks below her cottage. Not crashing, not roaring, but steady, trustworthy. She no longer moved with the urgency of survival. Instead, her days were slow and intentional. Coffee on the porch, a short walk through the cliff trail, quiet check-ins with Jack and Margaret, not out of fear something might fall apart, but simply to stay connected. One afternoon, a small envelope arrived in her mailbox. It was from the Women's Resource Center in Fort Bragg. Inside was a handwritten invitation. Would you consider speaking at our spring gathering? Your story gave us hope. It deserves a wider voice. Evelyn read it twice. A year ago, she would have declined. Polite, distant, invisible. Now? She picked up the phone and called the number. I'd be honored, she said. That April, Evelyn stood in a modest church hall, facing 30 women of all ages. Some were young mothers with tired eyes. Others were silver-haired, strong-backed women who reminded her of herself. All of them quiet, waiting. She didn't read a speech. She didn't need to. I used to believe that kindness meant silence, she began. That love meant letting things go. But I've learned that silence can invite harm. And love, real love, sets boundaries. She told them about Noel, about the house, about the business. But more than that, she told them how it felt to reclaim her name, her choices, her peace. And when she finished, the room was still. Then one woman stood. Then another. And another. They didn't clap. They reached for her. Joseph visited more often now. He never pressed, never asked for more than she offered. He helped her fix the loose step on the porch, brought fresh tomatoes from his sister's garden. Once, he left a note in her mailbox that simply read, "Wales coming back next week. Thought you'd want to know." He always signed with a J. One morning, as they stood side by side watching the sunrise, Joseph spoke quietly. "You don't owe anyone a future, but if you ever decide you want one with company, I'd be honored to sit beside you." Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned into the railing, took a deep breath of sea air, and let it fill her lungs. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like that. In time." He smiled. No rush. And there wasn't. She had all the time she needed. That evening, she lit a candle at her windowsill, not out of grief, but as a beacon, to herself, to whatever would come next. Because for the first time in a long, long while, she was no longer surviving. She was living. The anniversary of Noel's passing came quietly. No flowers, no crowds, no long phone calls from people who used to say, "Let me know if you need anything," but never called back. Just the sea. And a letter Evelyn had never opened. She found it tucked into the last pages of a folder labeled Legacy. In Noel's handwriting, the envelope simply read, "If you've made it this far, I knew you would." She opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, yellowed slightly at the edges, creased as if it had been handled more than once. "My Myrtle, if you're reading this, it means something awful has happened. I'm sorry I'm not there to walk you through it, but I hope what I left behind walked with you. I always knew you were stronger than you believed, that you saw more than you ever said. I watched you raise a son, build a home, and carry so many things with grace. So if this moment ever comes when people try to take what's yours or make you feel small, I hope you remember this. You were never a guest in your own life. You are the owner, the author, the storm and the shelter. Love, N." Evelyn folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't moved, but because the grief had softened into something deeper now. Not pain, but presence. She walked down to the bluff, where the ocean stretched endless before her. The sky was pink and gold, a soft palette that reminded her of Noel's favorite tie. Far off, the spray of a whale's breath burst through the horizon. She smiled. This was not a life she planned, but it was hers, and she was proud of it. Later that evening, she lit 2 candles at her window. One for Noel, and one for herself. The wind didn't blow them out. They flickered, steady, side by side, just as they had always been. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over poison. It means saying, "You don't get to hurt me twice." In this story, Myrtle didn't win by fighting back. She won by standing firm with dignity, with grace, and with quiet faith that truth always rises. Maybe someone in your life hurt you deeply. Maybe they never said sorry. But even so, you still have the power to forgive. Not for them, for you. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's strength in its most sacred form. And sometimes, the greatest act of faith is to let go and walk forward with love. Have you ever had to forgive someone who never asked for it? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it today. And if stories like this speak to your soul, don't forget to subscribe. There's more grace waiting on the way.